Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are starting to let people join the webinar. We will actually start the webinar here in just a few minutes. Hey, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Fighting Fraud Through Helplines. This webinar is brought to you by the National Center for Victims of Crime in partnership with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. My name is Laura Cook, and I am the Director of Training and Technical Assistance with the National Center. A few housekeeping items I'd want to note for anybody who's new to the Zoom platform. At this point, I think most of us are pretty familiar, but just in case, there's a Q&A box where you can send messages, where you can send questions that you have as we go through the presentation. You should see it either at the bottom or the top of your screen. There's a little panel and there's a Q&A button there. You can click there and type your question. I am going to save most questions for the end. If it's something quick, I might ask it after each speaker is done, but since we have 5 speakers today and I want to stay on track, I probably will save most questions for the end of the presentation. We will be sending around an email after the webinar with a link to the recording, a PDF of the slides, as well as a short survey that we'd love you to fill out. Before we get to our panelists, I'd like to give you a little bit of information about the National Center. We've been serving victims, advocates, and others who provide direct services to victims for over 30 years. And we have a number of programs. A few are highlighted on this slide here, and there are many others as well. You can find more information about our programs on our new website, www.victimsofcrime.org. I'm realizing I should have that up on the slide, and I'll add that again. It is www.victimsofcrime.org. This webinar today was put together through our Financial Crime Resource Center, which was started about 8 years ago with an aim to help victims of fraud in their recovery. And the Financial Crime Resource Center was started in partnership with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation as well. Before we get to our presentation today, I'd like to briefly introduce our presenters. Since we have 5 presenters today, I'm only going to note their names and titles, and I'll let them provide any additional information about themselves during their portions of the presentation. First up, we have Robert Maschio, Director of Investor Education Outreach with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. We also have Amy Nofziger, Director of Fraud Victim Support with the AARP. Next is Lori Schock, Director of the Office of Investor Education and Advocacy at the Securities and Exchange Commission. And Eva Velasquez, President and CEO of the Identity Theft Resource Center. And last but not least, we have my colleague, Sarah Olsen, the Director of Victim Resources at the National Center for Victims of Crime. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rob to tell you a little bit more about the FINRA Securities Helpline for Seniors.
Great, thank you very much. So first on the next slide, I'm gonna cover a little bit just high level about who FINRA is and who the FINRA Foundation is. From there, we'll talk about some of the resources that are available. So FINRA is a not-for-profit regulator, and we are authorized by Congress and are overseen by the Securities and Exchange Commission. We are not a government agency, And our mission is to provide investor protection and market integrity. And we do that through regulating and monitoring the brokerage industry and their employees. The FINRA Foundation was established in 2013 by the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA, and empowers underserved Americans with knowledge, skills, and tools to make sound financial decisions throughout life. This mission is accomplished through educational programs, through research that help consumers achieve financial goals, and that protect them in a very complex and dynamic world. On the next page, we have the Securities Helpline for Seniors. Now, the Securities Helpline for Seniors is a program that FINRA had launched in 2015. So it is just over 5 years old, and it is a toll-free number where investors can reach out and speak to a live individual about any questions, concerns, or comments they might have about their brokerage account, activity within their brokerage account, or their investments. The number to reach out to an individual on the Securities Helpline for Seniors is 844-574-3577. And the line is open from Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So over the course of the past 5 years, the Securities Helpline for Seniors has received over 19,000 calls in that 5-year period. It is called a Securities Helpline for Seniors. They do take calls from anybody of any age, but the average age of a caller that has reached out to this helpline is around 70 years old. Callers call in from all across the country. It is a national program, and all 50 states have had individuals calling the helpline, as well as international locations. Through this process, when an individual contacts the Securities Helpline for Seniors, they can be expected to be asked a lot of questions about what their concerns are. And when they speak to the individual, they will really work with them to gain an understanding of what is going on with their issue, with their concern, with their account. From that point, the analyst on the Securities Helpline for Seniors will look at the case and determine what the next steps may be. For example, it might be reaching out to the brokerage firm to gather some additional information to understand the other side of the coin and help resolve the issue for the investor. Through this informal process of reaching out to brokerage firms, the Securities Helpline for Seniors has been able to work with firms and return over $7.1 million to the hands of investors. Now, these are situations where the team on the Securities Helpline for Seniors elevates the concerns, elevates the matter that is brought to them to the brokerage firm, and they make the decision on their own to help remedy the situation. As matters come in that warrant further investigation, FINRA can also look into those to further investigate whether there is any violation of securities rules or regulations that we may be able to pursue. Of those 19,000 calls that we've received, about 1,300 have resulted in further investigation. And we've made over 1,500 referrals to various federal, state, and international regulators. Through this helpline, we also look to report matters to Adult Protective Services if warranted. And over the past 5 years, there have been over 240 reports that we have made to various Adult Protective Service agencies. On the next slide, I'm just going to go quickly about what FINRA Broker Check is. So oftentimes when somebody calls into the Securities Helpline for Seniors, they might have a question about an individual that they're looking to engage with. And a resource that FINRA has is FINRA Broker Check. The website for that is finra.org/brokercheck. And by going to this website, this is an external facing website, an individual can put in a broker's name, they can put in a brokerage firm, and from there they can look to see how long that individual has been in the industry, whether there is any disciplinary history, any disclosures, and if they are in fact registered with FINRA. If they are an investment advisor, if they're a registered investment advisor, Broker Check will also help navigate the individual to the appropriate website on the SEC's platform to look up the information on the investment advisor. It is a fantastic tool for any individual to use, and often one of the first places that somebody from the Securities Helpline for Seniors will discuss with the caller. Then on the next slide, this is if an individual wants to submit a complaint. If they have a concern and they really want to file a complaint, they can contact the Securities Helpline for Seniors and state that they're looking to file a complaint. But they can also go through FINRA's complaint process. So on this slide, there's a section on FINRA's website at finra.org where you click on the For Investors part. So that's that first red circle you see up at the top. From there, a drop-down will pop up, and you can click on File a Complaint, the second red circle showing on the slide. When you click on that File a Complaint, it brings you to an area where you can file an online complaint. You can put the details of your concerns into the complaint system, file it with FINRA. From there, the allegations, the concerns, whatever you're submitting a complaint on will be further looked at. You can also contact FINRA's Investor Complaint Center, and the phone number for that is 240-386-4357. So if you do have a concern and something that's investment related, securities related, dealing with a brokerage firm, I would encourage anybody who's listening to this webinar to leverage these resources, to reach out to the Securities Helpline for Seniors, to consider filing a complaint with FINRA if you believe a complaint is warranted.
All right, thank you so much, Rob. And next up, we have Amy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Knopfstiger, and I am the Director of Fraud Victim Support for the AARP Fraud Watch Network. Just a little bit about the AARP Fraud Watch Network for those of you who are not familiar with it. It is a free resource for anyone of any age, and you do not have to be an AARP member to take advantage of any of the services that we provide. And you don't even need to be over the age of 50. We help anyone with their fraud complaints and issues. One of the things that we realized that many of you know, because this is about helplines, is that when people are in crisis, they really want to connect with somebody live and in person and have that peer-to-peer counseling, so to speak. And so that is why with the AARP Fraud Watch Network, we added the helpline, which is such a valuable resource to people. So before we move on with the slides, I just want to show you a quick video about who staffs our helpline. Go ahead with the video.
It feels really good to help someone spot and avoid a scam.
Sorry, I'm just going to start this over, hopefully with sound this time.
Scammers don't care who they target, as long as you will agree to send them money.
Any of us can be targeted by scammers, but it doesn't mean we can't fight back.
Vigilance is our #1 weapon.
My name is Lynn with AARP Fraud Watch Network.
Since I've been here, I believe I've handled a couple thousand calls.
It feels really good to help someone spot and avoid a scam.
Many of the callers that call in, especially if they're victims, feel embarrassed or ashamed.
This is a judgment-free zone.
Call us on the helpline.
We are here for you.
Great, thank you. Sorry about the sound, but it sounds like the second time we went through, we all heard it. So the reason I wanted to show that is because I think it's just crucial that people know that Our helpline is staffed by volunteers. We have a group of dedicated, I think we have up to like 60 volunteers out of our offices in Seattle and Denver who manage the helpline and work one-on-one with the victims of fraud and help guide them through their situation. Oftentimes, as many of you know, that there isn't going to be, money returned to these folks, and most times there's not. There's not going to be prosecution against the perpetrators. But what a lot of our victims want is they want someone to listen to them, and they want someone to be empathetic in their situation and help guide them to closure of their fraud experience. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So I just want to put this up there so people understand kind of how the Fraud Watch Network helpline operates. So we work with our internal consumer cares team at AARP to triage some of the calls. So when you call the 877-908-3360 helpline for the AARP Fraud Watch Network, the first question you will be asked is, have you lost money or had personal information taken from you? And we're very clear on our language. That's one of the things that AARP Fraud Watch Network is working towards, is really changing the language of victimization in this country. We do not place blame on the victim, we place blame on the perpetrator. So not did you give them money, but was money taken from you, because essentially the money was stolen from them. So you can kind of read along with the flow chart, but if they answer no, that they're just reporting a scam or a scam phone number, then the team that we work with internally at AARP, they're gonna go ahead and take that report, give some fraud prevention education to that person, thank them for being part of the solution of reporting fraud, and really encourage them to continue to report fraud, because as we all know, fraud is vastly underreported. If they answered yes, that they have been a victim of fraud, or had money taken from them or personal information compromised, then they're going to come to a fraud specialist, and that is one of our volunteers. And so again, you can kind of read the flow chart here. So the volunteers, and just so you know, right now, we are all working virtually, and we have a pretty seamless process for our volunteers to get to these folks while they are all working at home. We had no break in our services during the pandemic. So they listen to the story, they provide resources, advice, and support. And then I know it's probably hard to see on your screen, but then you can see out of the 7 bubbles at the bottom in the red, besides the resources, advice, support, and empathy, we certainly will send them to a resource if that resource is going to be able to help them further in their situation, or if it needs to be reported to law enforcement. We do have a disclaimer on our helpline that all of our stories and cases can be shared and will be shared with law enforcement if appropriate. And all of our stories are shared with the Consumer Sentinel. We are one of the contributors to the Consumer Sentinel. And so that's just been a big plus for us to be a partner with them, because then we are able to supply them with close to 100,000 fraud stories from usually older adults every year. Then the other thing I want to draw attention to is, because AARP has such a large membership and voice, we certainly use the stories on the helpline to warn people about these frauds and scams. Some of the ones that we've had some great quick action with are the DNA swab scam that you all remember from about a year ago. We were able to put that in one of our publications that goes out to 35 million people, and we just had people coming out of the woodwork that were victims of the scam. Coronavirus scams, obviously now. And even, with the economic impact payment cards, a lot of folks were not aware that they were coming as a prepaid debit card. And so once we heard people throwing them away from the helpline because they thought it was a scam, we were able to get information out to them. So next slide. And this is just some of our stats. So year to date right now on the helpline, we have served about 44,000 people. Through our helpline. On average, we spend about 22 minutes with each caller. That's on average, because we have had calls that taken upwards of 60 minutes. We can't take all of the time, but we try to, because we know that oftentimes one of the red flags or one of the indicators of being vulnerable to fraud is that you're isolated and alone. And so instead of them talking to the scammer, that we would rather have them talk to us. Last year, just probably as many of you on the phone, our #1 most popular scam was the Social Security imposter scams. We are seeing a trend right now on Medicare imposter scams. And then certainly phishing, identity theft, and tech support scams have been very popular. So again, that just goes to show the value of these helplines, because if someone reports it on a Monday, we're able to get it out on a Tuesday and warn people about these scams that are coming down. So I think that's it for my time, and I look forward to any questions at the end that you have for me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amy. And next up, we have Lori.
Great, thanks, Laura. I'm Lori Schock. I'm the director of the Office of Investor Education and Advocacy at the Securities and Exchange Commission. And we deal primarily with securities fraud. And so unlike Amy, who sort of runs the gamut of all types of fraud, we're more narrowly focused. If I could go to the next slide, please. And as the government, I have a disclaimer that the views I express here today are mine and mine alone and don't necessarily represent those of the commission or the staff of the commission. And go to the next one, please. So Rob talked earlier about FINRA, and they're a self-regulatory organization, and we are the federal side of the securities regulator. So we are focused on investment fraud, but we take more than that through our call center. We will take any type of question that people have. It can run the gamut of, my aunt passed away and I found a stock certificate. Does it have any value? To, hey, I've had a problem with my investment advisor, trading in my account without authority, to, hey, look, I've been solicited to essentially an advance fee fraud where I need to pay money up front in order to get something. And when it comes to investing, you never have to pay money up front in order to make money. So advance fee frauds are actually our #1 investor complaint at the commission, and it's ranked in the top 5 for probably about the last 20 years or so. So the people who handle our calls at the commission, we have a staff of attorneys as well as investor specialists who have years, if not decades, of experience in this area. We will take any type of complaint people have, but if it's not securities specific, we will essentially refer those out to the appropriate agency. But if it is security specific, sometimes we may have to have them send in information in writing to us in order for us to follow up on it. It's actually very rare that we get a phone call from someone before they've turned over their hard-earned money. And so unfortunately, we're usually working from the backside once the money has already gone. And sometimes, we may make an enforcement referral or a referral to our Office of Compliance Inspections and Examination. But to be honest with you, even if we do finally catch the perpetrator, if there's any money left, it may only be pennies on the dollar. So it's one of those things. No one calls us because something good has happened to them. They're always calling because they're in crisis, and when dealing with their money, it's always a very emotional event as well. So last year, we handled about 4,000 calls. We also take in complaints through, email, our web forms, snail mail, faxes, and we handled about 20,000 total investor complaints and questions. Like I said, with about 4,000 of those being through our call center. So as Rob talked about, if we could go to the next slide, one of the things that we see is when it comes to investment fraud, generally speaking, the people are not registered. And if we could get folks to do this background check, and from the SEC, investor.gov is our retail-facing website. And if you were to look at that and just put in the person's name, whoever is trying to do business with you, and if their name doesn't show up there, or they've been barred from the industry, these are red flags on the play, and we're trying to get that message out to have people do the simple background check. it's interesting that folks probably spend more time, well, at least in the past, looking at hotels where they're going to stay for a vacation, or maybe even looking at a restaurant and doing due diligence on that before going to it. They do more time on that, spend more time on that than they do the background of their investment professional. And if people were to do this one step, it would go a long, long way to fighting investment fraud. So at the Commission, we spent a lot of time and energy, as has FINRA, as has the state securities regulators, trying to get this message out to make sure that they're dealing with someone who is licensed. And, that just gives people also, if something does go wrong or work against them, that there's a firm that stands behind them, and that there's some chance of recourse. But when you're dealing with a fraudster, unfortunately, they're not very good savers. And so even, like I said, if we have this successful enforcement action against them, generally the money is gone. And if I could get to the next slide, please. There we go. Just wanted to let you know our contact information. Our toll-free number is 1-800-732-0330. Also, we still use email, or we have a web form. So help@sec.gov, or if you go to investor.gov or sec.gov, you can also submit a complaint or question online. And appreciate the opportunity to be here today and look forward to any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lori. And next we will go to Eva.
Thanks, Laura, for this opportunity, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm Eva Velasquez, President and CEO of the Identity Theft Resource Center, and I know time is short, so I'll just dive right in. If you could go to the next slide, please. The ITRC's mission is to empower and guide all stakeholders to mitigate the risks and manage the impact of identity crimes. All of our services are free to the public. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We're funded primarily by government grants, donations, and corporate sponsorships. And we truly believe that all stakeholders have a role in this effort. Of course, I'm going to be focusing on what we do for victims and consumers, but we truly feel that by tackling this issue from both ends of the spectrum, from the remediation for actual victims to the education for those other stakeholders on how to lessen the overall occurrence rates, we really hope to create a world where the impact of this type of crime is far less traumatic than it currently is. Next slide, please. Thank you, ma'am. So our hotline or our contact center is definitely going to be the focus, but I think it's helpful for you to understand that we have many available services. We conduct research and surveys. We issue reports, excuse me, on all things identity and cyber. So we really take a holistic approach, and we use our research and reports to not only inform the public, but also to inform our frontline advisors as well. We issue scam alerts and provide consumer education. It's primarily focused on the preventative measure. Excuse me. I'm going to take a sip of my water and clear my throat, you guys. I'm sorry, one moment. My apologies there, folks. As I said, our preventative education is primarily focused on risk minimization techniques, but we tackle other subjects as well. And even though our name is Identity Theft Resource Center, we assist with a broad range of identity and cyber crimes, and that includes scams and fraud. Identity crimes are more than just identity theft. Data breaches fall into that category, and we assist data breach victims regularly. All types of identity theft, financial, criminal, government, medical. Anytime there's an identity credential compromise, so it's not just the misuse, the actual fraud, but exposures as well, we have found that people really benefit from our advice and help. And compromises can include self-compromise. And this is when someone will fall for a scam that includes not only losing their money, but when they give up those sensitive identity credentials as well. Currently with COVID, we've seen a huge increase in some very specific types of scams and fraud, ransomware, tech scams, imposter scams, phishing scams, and then scams around the stimulus payment, remote work scams, healthcare scams, and even census scams really had a big impact on the call center traffic that we were getting. We will use the information when we're talking to the public and hearing from victims. And then we turn around and use that, much like some of the other folks have already stated. We use that information and we turn around and educate the public. We'll ask for screenshots or other copies of the communication that the victim has received. We'll do some research. We'll write either a blog or a scam alert. We'll post it on our public-facing channels. We'll alert the media. We'll put it out in our weekly email blast so that we can build awareness about a particular type of emerging scam, hopefully lessen its success rate, and of course let people know that they have resources that they can engage before they make a decision, before they decide to engage with a scammer, that we're there to help them and give them advice and show them how to detect if that's a scam or how to detect if it's a legitimate offer. In general, we provide one-on-one assistance to about 10,000 individuals annually. We get about a little more than 20,000 calls into the call center per year, and we'll have probably around 1 million unique visitors to the website this year. Next slide, Laura. Before I go into detail about our values, I want to share the actual process. I think that's important just to understand how we operate the hotline, and that it is actually, our contact center is actually more than just our toll-free number. We use a variety of platforms so that victims and consumers have choices about how they receive the information they need. We have a toll-free number, our live chat services, web-based services, and even our app. And to the point that was made earlier, while a lot of folks really do need the emotional support when they're calling, and there's no substitute for that, we have found that with particularly with cybercrime victims, because they are somewhat savvy, or at least savvy enough to be engaging online, that they really benefit from our live chat services. They like engaging with our call center staff that way and getting the information or advice that they need through that process. So for the call center, our advisors are ITRC staff positions. We don't staff the hotline with volunteers because we found that this is such a dynamic and complex space that the level of training required to maintain the appropriate level of competence is really challenging to manage with the volunteer staff. Generally speaking, when someone's calling the center and actually calling the hotline, they usually need more in-depth guidance. And that could be for a variety of reasons. They may not have access to or be able to make effective use of the internet and online services. They may have a more complex case, or they may be so emotionally distraught that that kind voice walking them through the process is comforting to them. And just on a side note, I know that I'm talking about economic crime victims and not violent crime victims here, but they are emotionally impacted. Trauma is trauma is trauma. And believe me, these victims are traumatized. I am probably preaching to the choir here, but I just have to say that. So when someone calls us, they are assigned to an advisor who is their point of contact on their case, and they can and do reach out to them multiple times throughout the process. Any advisor can help any victim, but we found that having a primary contact builds that trust, and the victims really appreciate having that relationship. So we use an empowerment model, unlike a lot of the paid identity restoration services that you'll see out there. We don't have victims sign a power of attorney. We don't collect or maintain any PII or identity credentials, and we don't actually do the work for them or on their behalf. We stand beside them and walk them through the process. I always think of it as sort of holding their hand and walking with them, but not doing it for them. We'll provide all the necessary contact information for the specific organizations that they have to work with. And we'll give them the actual language to use. I think we can all agree and realize that a lot of the agencies and organizations, particularly government agencies, often have a language of their own, and they use acronyms that, and when it comes to fraud, that the general public doesn't necessarily speak that language. So we will get very granular on how they need to communicate what it is they need that agency or organization to do in order to remediate their case and get their needs met. And we even provide letter templates when it's necessary, when they have to send letters or do things in writing, so that they can just fill in the blanks and send it along. When it comes to the people we serve and our values, there are no qualifying attributes in place to use our services. There are no income thresholds, no age requirements, no regional boundaries. We're national in scope, but even if you reside outside of the United States, if a US identity credential is involved, we'll help you. As long as it's US infrastructure or identity credential, we can provide that assistance. We do have a number of referral partnerships and programs from other organizations, and usually that's because they either don't have dedicated victim advisors or advocates for identity and cybercrime, or if it's a very complex case. We have a referral relationship with the Federal Trade Commission, where if a case hits a certain number of attributes and is considered a complex case, they will send that over to us. And over the years, we've taken over 10,000 referrals just from the Federal Trade Commission alone. We don't have any per time call limits. Sometimes a victim just needs quick updates and the call will take 5 minutes. And sometimes they're so distraught that the advisors will be on the phone with them for an hour or several hours. I don't know if you all are familiar with what we call the Disney Princess Principle, but the folks that are costumed characters at those theme parks are taught that when a child comes up to them and hugs them, they do not let go first. They don't know what that child needs or what they're going through, so they're taught to keep embracing and engaging until the child lets go. And even though we aren't dealing with children, we're dealing with adults, we still embrace that philosophy. We don't let go until the victim tells us they've had their needs met and they're ready to move on and start remediating their case. We don't have any lifetime contact limits. Once your identity credentials are in the wild, particularly the static ones, they don't expire and they can be used forever. Someone may call us back 3, 5, 10 years later after their initial case because a new issue has arisen, and we will step right back in and help them and take it from there. And the last thing I want to cover is that the reason that we use that variety of platforms to engage with our victims is we really do want them to have a choice. Our knowledge base is available on our website for those DIYers that just want to look up how to handle a specific issue, especially more of the simple existing account type issues. Our live chat is on our website so that the victims can ask advisors questions. And this is actually a particularly helpful platform for the deaf, hard of hearing community. And then our social media accounts are places where people can make initial contact with us, and then we can get them working through that contact center system. And next slide. And the last thing that I want to cover is that we do even have our DOJ OVC funded app. It's a great way for individuals to retain our contact information because in addition to the case log feature that they can use to track where they're at with their case, it's just another lifeline to us. The contact feature within the app allows them to call us or live chat with us at the touch of a button. All of our contact information is at the bottom of this slide, so please keep it handy. Don't hesitate to reach out to ITRC directly, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Eva. And next up, we have Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Olsen. I'm the Director of Victim Resources for the National Center of Victims of Crime, and we actually run 2 hotlines that I wanted to talk about today. Slide, please. We run a national hotline called Victim Connect Resource Center and a regional hotline, which is the DC Victim Hotline. The national hotline is open Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. And the District of Columbia hotline is actually a 24/7 operation because there's also access to emergency services. Unlike the hotlines that have talked already, we actually work with crime victims of all types of crimes, including fraud and identity theft. So those emergency services are typically related to sexual assault and domestic violence for forensic exams, shelters, and emergency advocates. People can access either hotline through phone, chat, or text. Obviously, they can each call or text our number, and our chat platform is located on the respective URLs. Slide, please. Regardless of what hotline we call, we provide anonymous and accessible services. So we are not confidential, we're mandatory reporters, but we don't capture IP addresses or phone numbers. We don't log chats or record calls in any sort of way. Our services are available in over 200 languages, and we also prioritize hiring and retaining bilingual victim service specialists so that individuals can speak in either English or Spanish, depending on their preference, or move back and forth. Like one of the last presenter just mentioned, we also consider our chat feature to be an accessibility feature, particularly with the deaf and hard of hearing population. In DC specifically, we have Gallaudet University, and we definitely have seen an increase of contacts since we've implemented those services. Regardless of, and before I go into our services, one of the reasons that we think it's so important to serve all individuals of crime is because there's a number of specialized services out there, whether it's for domestic violence, sexual assault, or trafficking, or some of the things that we've been talking about today. And there's two really important pieces here. One is that many folks are experiencing sort of co-occurring issues. And even though they may call a hotline for one issue, they may actually need support in a variety of other issues because they're experiencing trauma, from a variety of different perspectives. And we also work with people regardless of when a crime occurred. So for example, it could have been at the moment a crime occurred, or it could be 2 years later or longer if they're still sort of feeling some ramifications for that. The three things that we try to provide every caller is emotional support, information or safety planning, and referrals. Our emotional support, we want our hotlines to be a safe space for people who visit. We put in a great deal of training for our advocates so that they can be trauma informed and culturally informed. We also take a strength-based and survivor-centered approach, similar to some of the other folks that have spoken. We believe that individuals are an expert in their own lives and that they alone know the best choices for them. But what we want to do is give them the right information so that they are making those choices with all of the information available. It could be, in the case of fraud and identity theft, that could be about crime reporting. It could be about what happens when you call other hotlines or law enforcement, or walking through a system process on how to freeze their credit. But it could also be something really simple that they just don't understand, and it could be interconnected. And we believe that with that information and safety planning, that they are more likely to take those referrals and next steps. Because we are both a national and regional hotline, we have a number of resources to provide people regardless of where they enter into our system. And the National Center for Victim of Service also has a program that develops all of the tribal resources across the country. So if someone needs a tribal specific resource, we have access to that as well. Slide. We believe that if we provide people with the support that they need in that moment and with the right information, that they will be able to regain control over their lives. And once they do that, they can start looking at how they want to sort of step out of it and take those next steps. If we walk alongside them as an advocate, providing them information, people are more likely to take those next steps than just simply being given them and not feeling like ownership over what they do. This little image I have to the right was actually something we drafted. We did a large research study when I worked in probation and parole and victim services about the victim experience for one notification. And this is what, you don't need to look at the details to realize that it can be an incredibly complicated process. And the truth is that almost all of our systems are equally as complicated. And the victim has the least amount of people that are there to help them navigate through the system. So by sharing that information and giving them emotional support, we want them to be able to figure out how to successfully use the right words and to take the right steps to have success in whatever they're attempting to do. Slide, please. Our referrals are pretty standard. I won't go into the details of them, pretty standard for social services, and can really vary depending on how localized we're getting. But I think one point worth mentioning, and I think another presenter mentioned this as well, is that a lot of the folks that we talk to, they may not have access to these specialized services, or simply giving them the emotional support and the information they need is all that they need to feel empowered and to sort of move forward and to close the door on the experience that they were struggling with. But for those who need extra services, we really try to focus on warm handoffs and walking them through the process and what to expect. Slide. So for fraud cases, one of the, because we take all types of crimes, I just pulled some information for our Victim Connect, our national hotline. We estimate that we'll have about 1,000 calls this year based on our first quarter's data. That would be about a 36% increase from 2018. We noticed that there's a number of co-occurring crimes that happen when people call. So if they're calling for fraud or identity theft, we might also see that they're talking about elder abuse, cybercrime, stalking, or intimate partner violence. And I think that makes sense to most people on the call. Some of these scams are targeted at older populations, or they're utilizing technology. In my experience, I've actually doing domestic violence work. There was actually a case that there was an intimate partner who was stalking their previous partner and spouse remotely, but they also stole her identity and gave it to their new girlfriend and committed a number of other crimes within their identity. And so, but we see that as a trend on the hotline as well. For crime reporting or for services that folks are looking for from us, it's typically walking them through the crime reporting process and connecting them with the right resources, or talking about recovery. Almost all of our calls lately have been about ID theft related to Social Security numbers. We will also refer to many of the hotlines that we've talked about here today, as well as other specialized hotlines like DV hotlines or sexual assault hotlines if there's some crossover. And a good number of them also want to focus on some sort of safety planning. Usually we only select this if it's a little bit more comprehensive, but most folks are interested in how to prevent something like this from happening to them again. Slide, please. So because we're a little bit different in focusing on all crimes, I wanted to end with why you might choose one of our hotlines instead of something more specialized. And typically it's because it's either outside of your jurisdiction to some degree or is outside your area of expertise. We have expertise in a lot of areas, particularly sexual assault, domestic violence, trafficking, fraud, and elder abuse, and others. And if we don't have it, then we usually have a contact where we can get folks what they need. We also have a lot of professionals call us. Instead of sending a client to us, they might call us asking for those resources or referrals generally, and we're always happy to do that over the hotline as well. For DC, it's exactly the same as Victim Connect, with the exception that it's open 24/7. If you have a client who's a resident of DC or has a crime committed against them in DC.
All right, thank you so much, Sarah, and everyone else. I really appreciate everyone staying on time. A couple of resources I want to note before we get to questions. We have the Taking Action Guide and Advocate's Guide to Assisting Victims of Fraud. This was produced with in collaboration with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation by the National Center, and it can be found on our website as well as the FINRA's saveandinvest.org websites. It's a guide for advocates. It kind of walks through 4 different main types of financial fraud and what advocates can do to help in those scenarios. And there are checklists that are specific for victims that we actually are updating shortly, and those will be available on the website as well. Next, the CFPB just put out a new resource, and this is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They've got a new resource on their website that has information about building an elder fraud prevention and response network. So we found that the use of multidisciplinary teams is really invaluable to victims. Specifically, if you're a local organization or state organization, when we are all able to work together on things rather than having victims go to tons and tons of different places and different organizations for different needs, it can be really helpful to them. And so this new resource from the CFPB helps with building those sorts of relationships. And then there's another great new resource that I hope to learn more about. I don't know a whole lot about it yet. I know they had a webinar Monday and I unfortunately had to miss it, but there's a new elder fraud hotline. I have listed the phone numbers down there and the hours down there. Because they're so new, I didn't have them participate in this. I didn't know about them when we started organizing this webinar. But I do know that they have case managers, and that is how they provide support. There is more information available about them online as well. And we will get to questions next. I'm going to list my email up here for everybody. So if you guys have questions that we don't get to, we do have about 10 minutes left, which is great. I will go through the questions in the Q&A box. But if there's anything we don't get to, feel free to email me at my email address listed on your screens there. And so the first question that was asked during Amy's portion was about language capacities. And I know, Amy, you answered that in the chat box, but would you mind also answering verbally for anybody who didn't read it? And then I'm going to let others also mention their language capacities too.
Of course, thank you. Yes, we work with a language line, so we have the capacity to have live translation services where we do a 3-way between the translation and the fraud specialist with any language. Primarily the languages that we serve are Spanish, Russian, and believe Vietnamese is our 3rd most. I haven't looked at that list recently, but yes, we have the capability to handle any language.
Great, thanks, Amy. Anybody else want to chime in about language capacities?
I'd say, so through FINRA, we do have individuals that work within the company that can help translate certain languages. So I would not have language be a barrier. We can work to try and find somebody that can still assist.
Alrighty, and somebody asked how we can get brochures to share with victims in our cases, and I believe this was during Eva's portion. So Eva, if you want to go ahead and answer that one first, and then I'll let others to share how to get information.
You simply need to reach out to me or to the ITRC at email. Let us know what type of information you're looking for. If it's just general contact information, we have both cards that are for service providers that you can keep at your desk. And we also have business size cards that you can give to victims so they can keep it handy with their, you know, in their wallet or just wherever they want to put that. And it's, we're happy to mail those out to you. Just let us know how many you need and we'll send them on.
Anyone else want to mention resources? And I believe a lot of folks are looking for resources that can be provided to victims that they serve.
For AARP, you can certainly go to the AARP Fraud Watch Network website, which is aarp.org/Fraud Watch Network. And if you scroll to the bottom, you'll see the Fraud Resource Center, where we have steps, kind of a little bit of a DIY on about the 60 most popular scams that are out there right now. But if you're looking for bulk, we have some great publications that are out, and you can certainly email me. And all of those are at PDF on that website, and you can let me know what you're looking for and we can get them out to you.
For FINRA,
and I do think, go ahead, Rob, sorry about that.
No, please, go ahead, it's good.
I think most of us do have resources that we would be more than happy to share, whether it's an online resource that we can direct you to that could be printed. I do believe a lot of us also have printed resources that are available. I know a lot of the federal agencies offer free resources to folks, like I think the FTC has lots of them. The CFPB is managing someone else's money guides, or I think you can get for free. So there are lots of free resources out there that you can get in bulk and then share with the victim. So if you're looking for something specific, you can shoot me an email and I can try to direct it to the proper agency. And then go ahead, Rob, if you wanted to share some of yours.
Sure, I was going to say, if you go to FINRA.org, and if you remember back to the filing the complaint slide that I had, there was a drop down for investors. And under that, you can access a whole host of different investor alerts, different articles that are written for investors to help educate them on certain situations, certain scams. We've issued investor alerts on things like binary option scams, on phishing scams, imposter scams. So those are all resources that are available there. And we also, through saveandinvest.org, which is a website that the foundation operates, you can navigate through there and access a whole bunch of free materials that you can order, including that fraud fighter investor kit that was mentioned earlier. And if anybody has questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me or reach out to anybody else with FINRA Foundation, and we can make sure that we get you those resources.
Great, thanks everybody. And then the last question, I see, I believe a representative speaking was a NAPTR event. This person submitted a complaint against Wells Fargo and is trying to find out what happened to the complaint. So in order to answer, I think we'd have to know where you filed the complaint. And like I believe Lori mentioned, lots of these agencies who are collecting complaints are, unfortunately unable to investigate every single one of them. The complaints that are gathered help law enforcement try to direct their efforts in areas where we're seeing lots of the similar types of fraud or lots of fraud affecting a lot of money coming out. And perhaps Lori can answer this better than me, but I think it is going to be difficult to track exactly what happened to each and every complaint that comes through most of these the system.
Thank you, Laura. And we do handle complaints against brokerage firms. So if it was Wells Fargo brokerage firm, you're welcome to send me an email or contact. My email is shockl@sec.gov. That's SCHOCKL at sec.gov, and I'll track it down. If it was Wells Fargo, the bank, that may have gone to the banking regulator or through the CFPB. But if it was the SEC, please feel free to contact us.
All right, thanks, Lori. And then I had a question about email addresses. I'll check with the presenters and see if I can share their email addresses with everybody. If you're presenters, if you're able to, if you're willing to share your info and able to type it in the chat box, go ahead and do that now. And then I'll follow up with you guys via email too, and include the emails in the follow-up email that will go to all of the participants who joined us today. Also in that email will be a link to the recording, PDF of the slides, and a survey we'd love you to fill out. We would really appreciate any feedback you have for us. Thank you all so much for joining today, and I hope everyone has a great day.